This episode is brought to you by BeWaterSmart.info. It may be fall, but it's still important to be water smart. Make sure your irrigation is off or adjusted for cooler, wetter weather. And did you know fall is a great time to plant your water-wise and drought-tolerant California natives? Planting now gets them established before the heat of the summer arrives. For a list of plants and more water-saving tips and tricks, visit BeWaterSmart.info.
Look at that plant. I want you to know that everything was grown in my garden. Don't touch that plant!
Is it poisonous?
She'll become part of the plant.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flower Power Garden Hour. I'm your host, Marlene.
And I'm your co-host, Bruce.
And on this episode, we're going to talk about seed starting. This is generally the time of year most people, or if they're starting vegetable seeds, will start at least getting the materials together and starting them, depending on which zone you are in and your weather. But we're going to sort of go sort of general and talk about seed starting in sort of a broader picture, and then all trying to do it within an hour. And of course, we can't hit on everything, but we'll hit on all the major topics and maybe dwell into more specifically tomatoes and peppers and maybe flowers, and then some other things that we'll probably just go on a tangent on and start talking about. So, Bruce, first of all, why seeds?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
Because you can get, well, there you are. Then you can get so many plants at the plant store, or can you? So the reality is the plant stores have a limited variety of plants, and they have the best sellers. They don't go into specifics very often, like specific colors. So the first and most important thing is that when you grow from seed, you can get a lot more variety, sometimes better varieties, and sometimes just better colors or more colors than you would normally get in the store, more varieties of vegetables. So that's number one. Number two is if you want to grow a lot of plants, and people like Marlene and I do not just grow two. We went like 50 of each.
Because we're dumb.
What are we?
We're dumb. No, just kidding.
So basically, if you can, it's cheaper because you can get a lot more plants for your same $5 for a packet of seeds versus $5 for a 6-pack. For the packet of seeds, you can get, sometimes 20, 30 plants. Mm-hmm. Frankly, I think personally it's more fun. It's more rewarding when you can just say, I got this from this little dust-like seed, and now you have this beautiful garden of stuff you got from just a packet of dust. And super important is that there is less risk of disease when you grow it yourself. There was a situation a few years ago with impatiens. They were getting a disease called downy mildew. And once the plant got it, it died. And it was transferred from plant to plant. So if you bought your impatiens in the plant store and you got it, you're stuck with it. But if you grew it from seed, the odds of you getting it were pretty reduced. So I think overall, if you can grow from seed, absolutely do it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of cases where you get into more rare plants that don't produce seed because you need a male and a female. They're not flowering at the same time, or they're self-incompatible, meaning that there's only one of them, even if it's considered perfect, it won't self-seed, or sometimes it's just really difficult to get seed off of something. So that would be a downfall. A lot of our rare plants at the conservatory, they just don't set seed, or we don't have both plants to do so. Right. One of the negatives and benefits is variability. So sometimes you don't know what you're going to get. Our variegated welwitschia that we talked about in the welwitschia episode was from seeds, and that's sort of a mutant, but you also get varieties of flowers, and this is where people cross plants, and then they collect the seed, and you don't know. So some plants come true to seed. When you hear that true to seed, that means you're going to get the fruit, the flower, when you plant the seed from that. And others you won't, which could be fun. That's part of the fun, is you just don't know what you're getting. But other times when you're like, wow, I really wanted this flower, and now I have this color flower.
Yeah, and that is the downside. But when you buy a packet of seeds, they'll let you know if it's if it's what they call open pollinated, which is where you're going to get whatever you get, or where it's specific cross, and you order a packet of red zinnias and you're going to get I'm going to say 98% red zinnias, not always 100%.
Yeah. And so a lot of I think tomato hybrids won't come true to seed. So if you let your tomatoes go, fall on the ground and set seed and they start growing, you're going to not get the tomato you want.
Right.
So a lot of heirlooms are stable, and you will get, if you collect seed from them, you will get that plant. So it's good to know. I think Meyer lemons don't come true to seed, but other lemons do.
Yeah, my general recommendation is if you want what you want, then you can buy seed, but don't use your old seed. Don't use the seed from the plants that you raised, because there's no guarantee that they weren't, number one, they're going to breed true. Number two, that they might have crossed with something else, and you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah. And then one last thing is sometimes, like avocados, if you grow something from seed, one, it won't come true to seed, but how bad could any avocado taste, really? I shouldn't say that. But
not in front of me.
it's going to take a long time to fruit for a lot of these fruit trees. Versus ones that you buy that are grafted. But we're stepping back, and we're mainly going to talk about vegetables and flowers and perennials seed wise. But that sort of just is, those are your reasons, positive, negative. It does require a little bit more setup than just going to the store and buying your tomato plants already sprouted. Some people may not have the space, or even the time to care for little seedlings.
And people who travel a lot, it is a problem. If your seedlings have a 6 or 8 week lead time and you're going away, you can't do it that year if you don't have anybody who's going to take care of them who you can trust.
Yeah. Yeah. So so we gave you some reasons why. So let's just go through sort of the soils that you use for, say, your tomatoes and then maybe your perennials, or is it the same? Because definitely don't want to go out and just dig up ground soil. That is bad.
You never want to do that, especially for seed stuff.
No, especially for seeds. And then you also don't really want to use potting soil. I'm not saying, I'm sure there's people who are like, oh, totally successful using potting soil. Yes, but it is almost too loose. You need something that's going to hold a little bit more moisture, because these seeds are very fragile. And as soon as that little root radical comes out, it needs to have moisture. So what do you use?
Well, I don't use straight potting soil. I have a potting soil that I purchased at a local nursery. That's a good quality potting soil that I use as my base. And I use that, frankly, as my base for just about everything. But then to my potting soil, I'll add a lot of peat moss, which is much finer. And I do add perlite and vermiculite. Perlite more to keep the soil a little aerated, and vermiculite actually holds on to moisture very well. And I do run into problems that my bits in my soil sometimes are too big for the seed.
Yeah.
And, this seed is a little piece of dust sometimes. So if you have a little piece of, cat litter sized perlite, that's a boulder compared to the seed. But it works for me. But I think a lot of people might want something a little finer than the soil mix that I use.
Yeah, I go straight to just pure peat moss and small perlite. So there's different gradients of perlite. So I use the very small size, and peat moss and perlite. I think just it holds the moisture. Of course, as you're working it, as you make your batch, you have to wet the perlite or the peat moss and really make sure you get all those dry pockets taken care of. So just pre-mix it with water, really mix it. It holds a lot of moisture. You keep adding water and you're like, oh my God, this is still dry. And then, so I do almost like a 50-50 blend. And that's just what I use to start vegetable seeds. And I just planted more flower seeds today. So I just mix it up and don't have it so it's so wet, but just enough moisture that it's not hydrophobic when you go add more water.
And I think the interesting thing is that Marlene and I are both using, I would say, very different mixtures, and we're both pretty successful. So it's what works for you is always super important.
Yeah, the peat moss I was getting, I was even, it's fine, but there were even slightly like pieces of like debris in there, and I was putting it into cell packs and or cell trays, and just one little large thing was, that was preventing, if I put the seed on top of it, it was preventing. So you do want something pretty small, but you also then want to pack it nice thing about the peat moss is you could pack it down enough so when you put a tiny seed on, it doesn't fall through the cracks all the way down to,
Right.
you know.
I think what happens for me is that I do, I don't want to say I sift the soil, but I make sure at the top I have a little finer
Okay.
layer, which I put on top. Not always, but then the seeds, to me, I say, well, they go into the little crevices and sometimes that's good. And, with begonia seeds, which are like dust, sometimes that's bad.
Yeah.
But they give you so many begonia seeds that you don't have to worry. But I
Yeah.
think you're right. One of the things I also recommend is never, just like you said, don't start with dry soil.
Mm-hmm.
I don't start with wet soil. I start with, moistish soil, I would say. It's not clumpy, but it doesn't fall apart in my hand. If you pick it up, it sort of holds its shape without being a clump. And then if it's regular seed, I might top water it in. But if it's fine seed, I'll actually, after I have the soil moistened, then I sow the seed, then I'll bottom water just because I don't want the seed to run off.
Yeah. So seed size is pretty important, and whether or not something requires light to germinate. So today I was seeding Lysianthus, which is a tiny seed, and also some celosia, which is also small.
Yeah.
And they all required light to germinate. So do make sure because some seeds want to be buried and others need light, which means you don't want to bury them and you don't want them falling necessarily through the cracks. So I was pressing that peat moss down and laying the tiny seed on top, and then I just watered it in with a nice as gentle as I could get, so the seed then doesn't get blown everywhere with the water. So there's just little caveats like that where it's like, oh, the seed doesn't want to be covered, and
Right.
I have to water gently in because it's laying on top of the surface.
The interesting thing is that seed that does not want to be covered, for the most part, I've noticed that is the tinier seed.
Mm-hmm.
Seed that doesn't make a difference. It can be bigger or smaller. I think the biggest issue is when the packets say must have darkness to germinate. And then what happens is you cover it and you check it every day. And now you planted 40 seeds, of which 3 germinated.
Mm-hmm.
So what do? Do you want to cover it or do you not? I've actually lately to start ignoring the dryness to germinate. I don't know, dryness, darkness. And I'll just, sprinkle some soil on the seed. And for instance, delphiniums are supposed to require darkness. I don't do it. I got excellent germination. It was the quality of the seed more than the darkness that was the limiting factor.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, ignore that.
Yeah, there you go. Ignore. And usually the size of the seed sort of denotes, unless it says it needs light, how deep you bury it. The bigger seed, it's going to be buried deeper. And, I just use the same peat moss and cover it. But at a wholesale nursery I worked for, we covered it with vermiculite because it was so easy to go on and held a little bit of moisture too on top. It was just easier. You could hold in your hand and it made a perfect, even covering. So I do recommend that. And I keep meaning to get some from work and myself, but I'm like, okay, I know what I'm sort of doing. I'll just put this on top.
I also want to add in, when you talk about needs light to germinate, you can still put a very, very light dusting on top of it, which sort of holds the seeds when they start to sprout. It gives them a little more to hold on to. The light's coming through.
Yeah. Yeah. So my vegetables, I will plant in either a cell pack, like a larger cell pack, like a 72 cell, or the 6 packs and put them in a non-draining flat. I've also done red solo cups with holes in the bottom when I know I'm started them early and I'm probably not going to move them out. I don't want to do a step up. So like some plants, if you start in a cell pack, then you need to move them up and then move them up. But what do you start yours in?
Well, if these are like teeny tiny seeds, like begonias, geraniums are sort of small, even impatiens, I'll start them more like in a 3-inch pot. Just sprinkle the seeds on top and cover them or not, depending. And when they are handleable, that's when I'll put them into cell packs. One of the reasons, for seeds that have low germination, I'll almost always start them in a community pot for that reason, because there's low germination, especially if they take time. I don't want to waste all that space on cell pack.
No, that makes sense. I mean, you're planting things that have lower germination. At work, we do community pots. So when we're doing cacti and rare plants, different plants, we will use even flats, like not nursery flats, but these sturdy flats with holes, and we'll fill them up with the soil, or we'll use 6-inch pots, something more shallow, and put a whole bunch of seeds there, wait for them to get a certain size, and then divide them out and then put them up in their individual pots.
Right. And that's really important for things that like cacti or lithops or many succulents that take a long time to reach a nice size that you want to actually put it into an individual pot. You don't want to disturb it. You just want to leave it. They're not going to crowd each other out. And you can stay in the pot for a year. When I start Clivia seeds, I'll start like 6 to a pot. The seeds are the size of macadamia nuts.
Wow.
And I'll leave them in a pot for a year and they're fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So it really just depends. Something really fast growing with really good germination rate. You put a seed in the cell. I mean, I do the same thing I've always done. And I'm trying to is like, well, I bet I'm not going to get all these 2. So I'll put like 2 in this cell pack and then every single one takes. And yeah, you could divide them. But
I would say once you learn what sprouts, if you have zinnias and marigolds, put one pot.
Yeah.
Because most of those are going to sprout and you'll know within a week or 2 or less. And then the ones that don't sprout, then stick one in. And guess what will happen? The first one will sprout with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So anything really goes for a container as long as it has a drain hole. And depending on what you want to do, if you want to go directly from seed to the ground, make sure it's a little bit bigger. Plugs are basically ones that are growing in cell trays. You want to make sure their roots are sort of just, you could pull out, and hopefully you have not root bound, but enough roots that when you put it in the ground, it could establish itself, or you could do community pots and move them up. Soil, pretty much anything goes. When you buy seed starting mix, it really is just peat moss and perlite.
I am not a fan of the store-bought seed starting mix. Maybe this is why I don't use the pure peat moss, because I just find, I don't know what it is about it. It just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I buy the
mild sphagnum in it too.
Oh, okay, I buy the big bales and of peat moss, and it works. Now the problem with that is a lot of seed starting mix will have fertilizer, and the peat moss is very acidic, but there's not a lot of nutrients in it. And so as soon as your seeds start growing, you got to start fertilizing. So I'm fertilizing with Max-C, which is a water soluble fertilizer, and I just put a teaspoon in a gallon and put it over the foliage. If I didn't have to fertilize, I would probably just bottom water, fill water up in the trays and let them soak up that way. But
that would be like a bottom feeder if you put the fertilizer in.
Yeah, it would. But I don't know. It's something about fertilizer. I want to get it on the foliage as well from top. So it's just quicker. So you do have to fertilize your seedlings unless your fertilizer potting has like added fertilizer. It'll probably last until you move it out of the pot. But if they're yellowing,
if you're starting those things that take 2 to 3 weeks.
Oh yeah.
Like zinnias and marigolds. Those are the ones I use as the classic example of things that you could probably start in the ground anyway. But if you like starting at pots to get an extra 2 or 3 weeks, if you don't fertilize, they'll probably be fine.
Yeah. Your tomatoes, it depends on how long in the soil. If you start noticing them yellowing, then you're going to want to give them some nitrogen.
Right. Or if they just do nothing.
Yeah. Generally, the problems I find that people have the most with starting like tomatoes is just the legginess and the stretching out and the inner nodes because not enough light.
Right.
We talked about how some seeds need light to require, but as soon as the seeds start up, you need to give them light.
And a south window, to me, is the only window that I would ever use for starting seeds. And even then, it's probably not enough light.
No, it wouldn't be enough light. I mean, I've done it. You could see them reaching for it. But if we've had the weather we've had this continue with just fog, there's not enough light.
Right.
So, and I've mentioned for the houseplants, those LED strip lights, that's what I use. You need them really close, like within inches of the plant.
Right. And if you have fluorescent lights, that's even more of an issue because the fluorescent light gets decreases its intensity, I think, sooner than the LEDs
Yes.
as far as distance goes.
Yeah, but these things are really close. I mean, they're like, I'm gonna have to move the flats that I have. I have some dahlias starting from seed, and they're already getting a little bit close to the light. But I want that because I don't want them stretched up.
Right.
Because like tomatoes, if they stretch, you could bury the stems. That's the one nice thing about tomatoes is when they're stretched out, you could bury the stems. Other plants you can't, and
Right?
you might
and you might rot them if you do.
Yeah, exactly. And you've sort of maybe already have lost that compactness by having them stretch.
I think the exception as far as having to be super close to the light is if you have those large LED setups like I have in my plant room.
Oh yeah.
I've measured the intensity, and I'm growing lithops probably 3 feet from those lights, and it's plenty. They're compact plants from seed, no less.
Oh yeah.
So I think you just need. There's a little thing you can buy since we're talking about light called. I think it's called Photon. It's an app. So you don't think you have to buy it. I think it's usually free, depending on which version you get, and it will tell you how much light your plants are receiving. There's plenty of other apps that you can get, so you can tell if your lights are strong enough.
Yeah, no. If you have the big banks, like at work, we have the bigger LEDs. I'm talking about my cheap ones that are just those need to be closer together. So yeah, definitely. So light is key. I would say light is probably one of the more problematic issues is people just don't have the light and they get stretchy and they get not as healthy and robust.
Right. And then they can flop over.
Yeah. Well, they do like movement too. That's the other thing is I think people forget about movement. Fans and air movement help to build the taper and the girth of the plant. I'm guilty of it. I don't have a fan set up. If you have ones that are like long-term seedlings, you do want to get air movement in there to get them moving.
In my plant room, it's not a greenhouse, but it's greenhouse conditions in many ways. I have a ceiling fan in that room, which happened to cover the room, and it's running 24/7. It's never off, and there's always a little. We call it a buoyant atmosphere. You can always see the bigger leaves of the plants sort of gently moving in the wind, and that's, I think, certainly good enough for the seedlings. It's not. The seedlings don't want to have like hurricane force winds on them, but a gentle breeze really helps. It keeps the disease down too.
Yeah, exactly. Do you ever use bottom heat?
I use bottom heat for germination, and most of the time it's helpful. I've seen situations where the bottom heat was just too intense because these bottom heat mats raise the temperature a certain amount above the room temperature versus having an actual thermostat. So you got to be careful. But I do use bottom heat. Lately, I've been growing some South Africa plants that wanted a 12 degrees centigrade, which I believe was around 20-degree difference between day and night to bloom. So I put sprout. So I put my heating mat on a timer.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I do use bottom heat for almost everything.
And those are those nuances you have to know the plant and do a little research. As people think, oh yeah, I'm gonna across the board plants just like bottom heat. My seeds are going to germinate faster, but that's not always the case. If you left that on, you probably wouldn't have had germination.
And here's the thing: read the label. Because they'll tell you, most of the times they'll tell you you have the internet available if you don't have a label with much information, but they'll give you a lot of information as far as lightness, darkness, how long to expect it to take to sprout. Do you want bottom heat? Do you actually want to keep it outside because it doesn't want heat to germinate?
Yeah. Yeah. So, but tomatoes and peppers and most of your seeds, I do bottom heat. It could run 24/7. And the heat mats I use are those Frog. I forget the brand. It's the ones you find.
You see them. It seems to be just one brand that you see in most of the local stores these days.
And they work, and they come in ones that fit on a rack, and you could put. I have four seedling trays that are sort of just parallel to each other. So there's fitting 4 of those, but then they have the windowsill ones in case you're growing them on the windowsill.
Those are narrow,
yeah, very narrow. They fit on the windowsill. You just have to make sure that for all of these, you have to make sure your cats don't discover that they're a heat bed because they will knock your stuff
like warmth.
Yeah, they love warmth. Then they'll knock them off, and I've had them do that.
That's right. And they'll just knock it off, but they'll stare at you as they do.
Oh yeah, they'll look at you and then just be like, "Oh, these are your seeds? Oh, too bad." Yeah, I think there's ones that fit just one seedling. So,
And they're the ones that you can put right under
mhm,
your starter tray.
yep. Yeah, and I think they increase the ambient air 20 degrees. I
Right.
think that's it.
Sometimes what I'll do is I'll take a something, maybe a 1/4 inch thick. It could be wood. It could be anything that's going to block the heat slightly. So if I don't want it to be quite as warm, I
Mhm.
might put that in between the heating pad
Yeah.
and the flat. And that helps if you don't want things to be 85 degrees, you want it to be like
Mhm.
75. That'll dissipate the heat a little bit. And it really does help prevent it from drying out too much also.
Yeah, because it will dry. So you don't need to do bottom heat for the most part, unless a plant says yes, you need the
Correct.
temperature difference. But for your peppers, and you don't need them. Does it speed up germination? Yes, it does. But if you're
And
on
growth.
Yeah, and if you're on track, then you don't. But I've learned to get them right off. As soon as they're germinated, I let them get to almost their first set of true leaves, and I take them off the bottom heat because the soil starts drying out really fast. And I
Right.
also find that they grow a little bit faster than I want them to. I want them to be a little bit slow growing and a little more compact. So I've taken my first round off. They're definitely under intense lights, but I take them off. So I'm pretty much just using them for germination, and that's it. Because I've left it on before and they just dry out so quick.
Yeah, I will say that that's been an issue. Also, if you're like me and you're growing lots of different stuff, you get it on the germination pad. You wait till you're sure they're gonna survive the germination process. Then I get them off and put the next batch of what I'm growing on. I was growing a lot of African violet relatives, various gesneriads, and I did keep them on the heating pad until for weeks because I just needed that space. And I was actually amazed at how quickly they grow.
Mhm.
And these are plants that are not known for going from seed to bloom in 3 months, but they did.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean,
So it's up to everyone's choice.
yeah, and it's
What
also an
works for you.
experiment too. If you're willing to experiment, like, oh, if I'm going to
Right.
leave these on, I want people to know they don't have to, if the cost of seeds is the reason why you're growing things by seed, then you're like buying a heat mat, then you're buying a light over the heat mat for sure.
Right.
Um,
And I think we mentioned water. Maybe this is about a good time to talk about
yeah.
keeping your seeds and seedlings well watered, but not
Hmm.
overwatered.
Yes. Yes. So when people send me pictures, it's generally a combination of poor soil and then which leads to watering issues, is some of the second biggest. Well, I would actually say over light issues is, they use a potting soil or they even use, and then their watering is not on track with
Right.
that type of, yeah. So unlike your plants a lot of plants want to dry out a little bit between watering, you do not want your seed trays to dry out.
Right. If you have a seedling that dries out to the point of collapsing on the soil, the odds are you've killed it, or it will really not come back in enough time to make it. It might just be better to start seeds over again. So you never really want them to dry out. And I even hesitate to let even just the top little bit dry out
Mhm.
until I'm sure they are there
Yeah.
again. But overwatering will cause death just as quickly.
Well, that's why we both add perlite, because perlite is great at creating that aeration, whereas the
Right.
peat moss holds it. And you're right. Most potted plants, you would dig down and check the soil moisture if the top is dry, and you go, okay, it's a little wet
Right.
down here. You see that top soil of your seed trays dry, automatic water.
Yeah, I have a lot of long-term seedlings that I'm growing, and the biggest problem is that I want them to develop roots. I don't want them to be overwatered. These are things that in the summer actually like a dry. This is South African bulbs, and it's a real hard decision. Do I want to water? Do I not? Are they going to go dormant the first year? I mean, we're generally talking vegetables and flowers today, but if you're growing these long-term plants, and frankly, even begonias and some others that take 4 to 6 months to bloom sometimes, they're gonna have to be really careful about when they're in this tiny stage. It's a fine balance of too much versus too little, and that's the hardest part, frankly, of I think long-term seed growth
Yeah,
is
yeah.
the
Yeah.
water in that sense.
Yeah. So, yeah, you definitely want them to stay moist. If you see algae growing on top, it's too wet. The domes, you could buy the kits and then there's the dome trays. I don't like those. I think it stays too wet in the covered containers.
Yeah, I had some high humidity plants growing in one, and it was too much for them.
Yeah.
I do use them, but the newer ones have little top ventilation
Yeah.
things that you can open up. It tends to just keep the drier spot by the hole,
Yeah.
but it does help,
A
I
little
think,
bit.
prevent the too humid environment in them. So I like that.
And it lasts for 2 turns and then it breaks. But then you're
Well,
like, oh.
well, I only turn it once. I just keep it closed, and it goes a quarter,
Exactly.
then an
That's
eighth,
it.
and
Yeah, that's it. No, it's a good idea. It's a good idea. And there's no right or there's a few wrong things. Like don't let them dry out. That's the key is even our little cacti seeds will start in small pumice. So like 3/16 pumice, which is really quick draining, but we'll mist them every day. And that's the other thing is you got to do a fine mist. If you go in with the heavy, heavy water, you could snap them off. You could wash them away. So do a fine mist enough, so the top, depending on where your soil's at, of course, but a fine watering can with a fine mist on it will work.
Yeah, doing cacti in that sense, that's a big issue because I also started some cacti from seed for the garden. And, I will admit I dried some of them out and I had like 12 to start and there's 6 left because I didn't water enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, but when you miss them, they just sometimes the little tiny babies, they have a teeny tiny taproot and they just wash away.
And it's the opposite. You're like, oh, cacti. Well, they require dry. No, not when they're seedlings. Every day, like our Welwitschia seedlings, we water pretty much every day. So a lot of seedlings are they're just very sensitive to. They just don't want to be dried out.
Because also remember that if you've ever opened a cactus seed pod, there's hundreds of seeds in there. Only one of them needs to reach maturity. So, and that's from one seed pod. So plants, unlike people, plants don't really care about the individual offspring. They just have lots and lots of seeds so that hopefully one of them will grow.
Oh, yeah. And, that's a good time to mention just real quick, orchids seeds.
Ah, yes.
Why don't people plant orchid seeds?
Well, orchid seeds are special in several ways. Number one, you can get 100,000 seeds per seed pod.
Yeah.
And unlike regular seeds, which you see have what we call an endosperm, which is a little bit of food in the first leaves for feeding the growing plant. Orchids don't have that. So if you think of one orchid needs to replace itself once in its life, and it has in the course of that life, I don't know, let's say 30 seed pods with 3 million or 30 million seeds it will have in one lifetime, and you only need one. So that shows you how in nature nature does not expect to get a gazillion seeds from one plant, and yet we're trying to get the maximum amount out of that one seed pod.
And I think most orchids require like mycorrhizae of some form, then finding out which mycorrhizae for which species is not been done yet. So that's why they need a little extra boost. But just in case people are like, oh, why aren't we growing? I'm gonna, people fall for these things online, like, oh, there's this blue rose for sale seed. Like, you don't buy rose seeds, don't buy orchid seeds unless you know what you're doing. So there's certain seeds that are just no go. You're not gonna get the plant from it. Speaking of oddballs, so we have this plant called Cyphostemma, and the seeds require sitting for decades before they really germinate. We collected a whole bunch and 2 germinated right away. But let's start talking about temperamental seeds and things that you do to get some seeds require extra love, extra steps, like not your tomatoes. Now there is sort of, I don't know where this came from, but just recently I've heard people say, oh, you need to let your tomato seeds ferment. I'm like,
what? No. Would it help? Would it hurt? I haven't the slightest idea, but don't bother.
No, let them dry. if you're harvesting for the following year, cut them open, take all the tomato flesh around, and like all seeds, let them dry in a cool, dark, but dry. And then you
Yeah.
always want to store seeds in paper, not plastic, because they're going to sweat. So put them in, coin envelopes. Some require being stored in the fridge. You do want to, usually that helps them last longer. But this fermentation thing I thought was very bizarre. I swear
Yeah.
people are just looking for content to put on TV or like
Yeah,
YouTube.
I've never heard of that. In fact, the only seeds that I've heard of fermenting were heliconia seeds that we tried to sprout in the
Oh, yeah.
conservatory. I haven't gotten a single one.
Yeah. So no, they don't need to ferment. In fact, tomatoes do a weird thing called vivipary, which is they start germinating inside the fruit. So they'll start germinating as soon. They're like, well, we're ready to go. Just as soon as the fruit drops, we're hitting the ground and growing. So a lot of tropical plants will do that. They don't want to dry out at all.
Yeah.
They want to be in the ground. So that's
And
just something.
if you're growing tomatoes in the garden, you'll notice next year from the ones that you've left to rot, there's plenty of tomatoes sprouting.
Yeah. And that, as I mentioned, they may or may not come true to seed depending on,
Right.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the oddball ways to get your seeds to germinate besides just what the packet says, light, no light, bottom heat, no bottom heat. Things with a really hard seed coating.
Right. So some plants have the seed coating is preventing water from getting in, but it also helps when the plant is in its natural environment, the water will gradually decompose the seed coat. And so it'll take a very long time to sprout. I think maybe you could tell me, Marlene, maybe that gets it to sprout in the next season so that it's dormant for a year or whatever. But
Possibly.
I think that's when we do what we call scarification, where you might take a nail file and scrape the seed coat to allow water to come in more quickly. Now, is there a specific area, Marlene, that we'd want to do that scarification on the seed?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, some people do it at the end, but I think anywhere around I think it's seed to seed, but really you could just go anywhere.
Now, I do grow a lot of clivia from seeds. Clivias, they're not that common in gardens, although if you see them in the stores, they have sort of strap-shaped leaves and big orange flowers in the spring. And what I'll do with those, they're very fleshy seeds, as are many plants in the amaryllis family. And so what I do is after I've soaked them in a bleach solution, and we can talk about that too, I'll go to the seed cap, the root cap where the root's going to sprout out of, and I take a little knife and I peel away that little root cap. And after soaking for 2 days, sometimes the root will just sprout out of that within a few hours versus taking sometimes weeks to sprout, and they rot during that time because they're fleshy. So that's a really specific thing that you want to do for certain seeds, and you'd have to research it. That's more for oddball plants that you probably not going to be growing from seed.
Yeah, so you soak, for in that instance, you're soaking in bleach and then you're cutting. And then, but for ones with like a really like hard seed coat and you're not sure, just take sandpaper and just do a quick sort of run over the sandpaper. I know some people will take a knife and just sort of scar and scrape. And that basically it's just letting water in and sort of bursting the seed coat off, and then the root radical could come out.
Right.
So those are the main physical ways of getting something, is you're just really getting that seed coat disrupted.
And that can save you sometimes years.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, some of these seeds you're like, this thing is rock hard. Yeah. I'm just going to wait forever. Then there's the interesting ones of chemical.
Oh yes. There's the ones where you mean the fire.
Yeah.
They haven't been exposed to fire.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, we have a lot of chaparral, California native chaparral plants are like that. There has to be. So when, there's, before we had these forests, it was fires and, these huge raging wildfires. It was normal for chaparral areas to burn because that's what triggered the next round of, plants growing, because they're based on fire, their germination.
And they wouldn't germinate if they were not exposed to the fire.
Yeah. And, it's not the heat. even though we call
The humidity.
That'd be the other way around. No, so you could buy liquid smoke that you like make beef jerky with, and it's the chemicals in the smoke. So it's not the heat. Like a pine cone, the resins on it, yes, crack open due to the heat, and that releases the seed. That's different. That actually requires heat. But certain chaparral plants, it's the chemicals in the smoke that will then trigger the break of seed dormancy. And liquid smoke has it.
Now, there's another thing you can purchase. I do Australian plants, and you can purchase a little packet of granules that you sprinkle on with the seed. And as that gets wet, it releases, I guess, similar chemicals to help the seed sprout.
Yeah. And I just read too that you could buy vermiculite that has it. So I was mentioning the top coating of vermiculite. And I think that's so you don't have to buy the liquid smoke, but I don't know why you'd miss out in going to work and having the smell of beef jerky. So we had a container of it for a while, and I finally got rid of it because one, we weren't using it that much. I'm like, oh, if we need it again, I'll just buy it. But two, it just made me hungry and want beef jerky every single time because it's liquid smoke. But the chemical, I won't be able to pronounce the chemicals. I think it's a whole like group of chemicals that's carcinoids. There you go.
Gesundheit, as we say.
Yes. So that is one way. Other ways that you could break. So if you hear something saying, "Oh, fire, it needs fire," liquid smoke's the way. Other ways are you're getting into some serious acid here, man.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the acid.
No, we've used it's very like 25%. You could use like sulfuric acid.
Yeah, because sulfuric acid, otherwise known as lye, is one of the safest things you can have around the house. Liquid plumber.
There you go. Hey, when you really, the slogan should be, when you really need that seed coat broke.
Oh, I have to correct myself. Sulfuric acid is not lye.
It's not lye.
Is sodium hydroxide.
Okay. So sulfuric acid is the swimming pool stuff cleaner. So I know it can't be clean swimming pool. So just like a 15% dilution or solution. So we're not talking straight. You're just going to kill your seed that way. And I think phosphoric acid. So yeah, if you don't want to deal with acids, then, do maybe some scraping and stuff.
Will vinegar work?
I don't think it's strong enough. Maybe for some. I mean, just look at pea seeds. All you need to do with pea seeds is lay them in a wet paper towel and warm water. So some of these just require soaking 24 hours in water to just sort of break that seed coat. So it's all across the board. But, for tomatoes and peppers and eggplants and your run-of-the-mill cut flowers, you don't need to do anything. Usually if the seed is like that flat and papery, you don't need to do anything.
In fact, the vast majority of stuff that you will be planting this year, you will not need to do anything special.
Yeah, if someone gives you a seed and it looks like a bead, and you're like, wow, should I make a necklace out of this or should I plant it in the ground? Chances are you're going to need to do some scarification on it. Not always, or at least try soaking it. If you know the name of the plant, do research on it. If it's a native chaparral plant and the seed is pretty big, maybe it needs the liquid smoke. But yeah, most garden, you do, well, even corn, even though it's hard, obviously you don't need to do anything with it. So it's really seed to seed, case by case basis. And we don't even know when we get seeds at work, we're like, ooh, okay. And a lot of times there's no information on it and it's trial and error. And sometimes the bummer thing is you don't have many seeds of something.
Right, I could get sometimes 5 or 10 seeds in a packet.
And you're like, or you're collecting them because you've produced them and you're like, well, I don't have a lot of seeds to mess around with. So that's why you don't always necessarily want to sow all your seeds with one method at one time.
Right. And generally I'll do, if it's a seed that I've ordered from another country, I'll do about half at a shot for that exact reason that if they don't sprout, maybe I'll want to try something different.
Yeah. And I've had seed companies like some peppers sent and they say on the package, low germination rate.
Right.
So you don't feel bad. You're like, okay, I'm expecting this. And then so, they set your expectations really low. So you're like, yes, I got 2 out of 50. Yay. So yeah, different.
Now I think another thing we touched on is the cold treatment, the stratification versus scarification.
Yes.
which is where the seeds sometimes need to be kept cool or cold or even frozen for a while before they sprout. And that has to do apparently with certain germination inhibitors in the seed itself, that they need a cold treatment. Now, Marlene, if I buy a packet of seeds that needs a cold treatment, can I just take the dry seeds and put it in the fridge for 3 months? Will that work?
Generally, yeah.
Really?
I mean,
I don't have to sow them?
oh, you mean sow them first or put
Right? Do I
them?
have to sow them in the pot and
I
then put
would.
that in the
I
fridge?
would. I would.
That's what I generally
Yeah,
do.
that's yeah. And with that, I'm not. So a researcher is trying to grow a oh heck, it's a nightshade. It's I forget what it is. What is the one with has the papery husk around it?
Oh,
Not
I
a
don't know.
gooseberry,
Tomatillos.
not a tomatillo, but very similar.
Oh,
No, a
gooseberries.
down cherry, or what are they? Ground cherry. There we
Brown
go.
cherries.
Ground, but
Better.
a different species. And ground cherries are weeds in my garden, and I'm like, I don't think this is any like different. And she's like, we're in lab, and we can't get any to grow. And I'm like, that's bizarre. And my instinct was I'm just going to plant them up. And then I'm like, let me look at the species and see. And sure enough, it said it needed some cold treatment. And I asked her, I
Right.
said, well, did you try chilling the seed first? And she's like, no, we didn't. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to stick it in the fridge for a bit. I didn't plant them. I just put the seeds in the fridge.
Right.
So
And
I'm
I
assuming
do
that
for
will,
storage, but I have something about them not being moist makes me wonder if
Mhm.
whatever the chemical reaction that occurs from the cool temperatures works without it being moist.
Well,
I don't know.
no, I think you're right, because I think it's all the requirements for a seed to germinate plus the cold.
Right.
So I think because it's going to be, once you give it everything it needs and it has the cold, it's going to send that root out.
Right.
So now we're talking through this and I'm like, yeah, I better pot those up and stick them in the fridge.
Now, I have a weird one that I've been trying to grow a lot of perennials from seed. And of course, perennials frequently are experiencing their native environment winters that are very cold. So some of the seeds that I have will say, place in the refrigerator or keep cool for 3 weeks, then bring into warm. Some of them actually say keep warm for 3 weeks. Then if they don't sprout, put them in the fridge for 3 to 6 weeks, then take them out and keep them warm again. And some even say go to them in the fridge for a second time. So I think that would
Wow.
be something that's maturing in the midsummer. It goes to the ground, it's warm, then it goes cool, and that temperature going from warm to cool triggers germination.
That's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. And those are the seeds that I take out my packets to start seeds. And I say, oh, I'll do these next week.
What are they? I've never even heard, like, what perennials?
Phlox. The phlox packet said
Really?
grow. I think it was the phlox. It said grow
Okay.
at regular, not annual phlox.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
perennial
Mhm.
phlox.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
And a couple of others.
I can't say I've ever seen that, but
I didn't see it until I got these. There's a company called Julito, which is a international company which sells thousands of varieties
Mhm.
of perennials. And that is one of the they give you the specific numbers of lists of different ways to sprout the seeds. And I believe it was the phlox that said warm, then cool, then warm again.
wow.
What a
Okay.
pain in the neck.
Yeah, that's a pain for a plant that is difficult to grow. I mean, it smells great, but a little tricky. It is possible to direct sow a lot of these plants
Right.
that don't require a lot of extra. Um, Most people avoid that. I avoid that because you don't have as much control of these tiny little, like I think we talked about last time how I forget what you planted, but you're like, oh, I don't think any of them came up. And I'm like, well, they probably got eaten by something before you.
Oh, that was my lettuce.
Yeah, there you go. So things may germinate, but they're so small and so fragile that anything could wipe them out.
Right. And then there are the plants that I wouldn't say you have to direct sow, but things like California poppies and even nasturtiums that we often do direct sow. Some of them are, like, for instance, there are these pink California poppies that do not have great germination.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might want to germinate them in a 6-pack, but when you germinate them in 6-packs, they tend to not, any root disturbance tends to kill
Yeah.
them. So for those, it might be beneficial to use the peat pots.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The pea pots. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the pea pots will theoretically dissolve, decompose when you put them in the ground, but you have to make sure you bury the entire pea pot. And I still would recommend taking a knife and just gently,
Yeah.
and when the plants are ready to go in, cut the pea pot, because they don't always decompose completely, and then the plant becomes root bound.
Yeah.
But those pink California poppies are really pretty. The nice ones, there are from plenty of horrible pinks. But
Yeah.
the nice pinks, you get a packet of 10 seeds. And unlike the orange ones, where you get 1,000 seeds, you get 10 seeds, and you don't want to plant them directly in the ground because you will not get good germination. So things like that, nasturtiums, if you're growing some special varieties.
I mean,
I'm sure there are others.
yeah, and a big reason why you can start seeds inside and why you may want to is getting a jump start on the season too.
Right. In fact, we didn't even go into that. But yeah, that's the other reason.
Yeah, right now you could almost start your tomatoes. If you're aiming for mid-April planting out in the garden, then you backtrack. But if you're looking for your tomatoes to get a head start and you didn't want to buy them, you plant them now. So by that April time, they've hardened, because you need to harden these seeds off too. And that means move them from their comfy, they're like nice, warm inside with light. And you gotta, growing up is hard. You gotta learn the hard way. And no, but you want to do it incrementally.
The packers will often tell you that too. Should you start it indoors? Is it recommended not to start indoors, or the other way around?
Yeah. Yeah. And then you want to move them to where they have a bright light, maybe some morning sun. And this is where the transition, where they could go from, I've been watering them this much and they've been staying moist, even though they're getting light and inside. If we have a warm day and that sun hits them, they could dry really fast. So you might be watering your seedlings inside every 3 days to watering your seedlings outside every day.
All right. So that transition period where you're hardening the plants off, there's two things you need to harden them off to is, like you say, it's the watering schedule, but the lighting that you've had inside, even in a really bright LED, is nothing compared to the light of 1 hour of hot sun as far as the potential damage to the leaves. So I will actually put mine for the first few days in just not pure total shade, but an area does not get any direct sun. I'll put it that way. And then, like you say, just maybe give it an hour of morning and then a little bit more, because the plants just don't automatically, just like you get a sunburn, they get a sunburn. And they will sometimes get set back dramatically if you give them too much sun too fast. Yeah.
And I know I read people like, okay, I'm hardening my seedlings off and I bring them in each night. No, I don't do that unless it's really like temperatures are dropping and I know the plant won't be able to handle it. I'm moving them out when it is, the nighttime temperatures are fine. Just trying to, I could theoretically, everything's warm enough, the soil's warm enough to be planted, because the hardening off process isn't going to take much. It could be
a week or two.
Yeah, it's not going to be that long. So you want to do it right when you could almost plant. Of course, strange things happen. We could get a cold spell, but generally you do not need to bring them in every night. No, just you want to put them up against a house. You don't want them out in the middle of, out in the open. Right. So you're moving them incrementally to where they'll be okay once they're in the ground.
Right. And if you have a lot of plants, you can't be bringing them in and out.
No,
it's just too much work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to talk about the major problem I see when people send me pictures is soil. And, you do something that I wouldn't recommend, but you have it dialed in and you've worked, with your potting soil. But I would say when in doubt, do like a very, water holding, but loose. I recommend peat moss and perlite. Doesn't have to be this, but moisten it and really watch the soil moisture. Do light. Light is key. Do make sure you know you're going to have to probably fertilize when they're inside. Oh, yeah. Got any oddball ones?
Oh, I wanted to add that, because we didn't really go into that, plants that you have to pot up if you're starting in a community pot and potting it up. Mm-hmm. When you're doing the transplanting, first wait until you get the second pair of true leaves versus the cotyledons, which are the baby leaves. never handle the plant by the stem because that
No.
stem
Yep.
is really fragile.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to actually, believe it or not, you handle the plant by the leaves, even if you have to detangle the roots a little bit. They'll hold together. The leaves will not rip off. And that way you prevent damage to the stem, which frankly is usually fatal. So it's really important that when going from your community pots to your
Mm-hmm.
6-packs, that you do not hold the leaf plants up by the stem.
Yeah.
Once they're at the next level, it's not a problem.
Yeah. And I trained a whole bunch of volunteers this last week on transplanting. And, I won't have them do like seedlings yet. So, but I did mention, like with any plant, you don't want to just grab it and yank it out of its soil. What I would do with a community pot is turn the pot on its side,
Right.
tap it, and then just let the whole thing fall out on its side, and then just slowly detangle them, and always cover your little seedlings with a wet paper towel or the wet soil. Don't let them just sit out there, and try to get them in soil as quickly as possible. And then they're going in from the seed starting mix. They're going to go into their individual pots in a potting soil.
Right.
And then you're going to water them once they get a little more established, like you would a potted up plant.
And what's really interesting is you take these little seedlings, like you'll get a packet, you get 30 seedlings come up in a pot, let's just say, or 20, whatever, of which 10 will be big, 5 will be medium, and 5 will be teeny tiny nothings with maybe one little strand of root. But the amazing thing that you'll find is, even though you'd be such surprised, you wouldn't expect them to survive, those little one root seedlings, most of them will survive.
Yeah.
So they're not as fragile as you'd think. The biggest issue is crushing them versus detangling them. If they have enough, they have a little bit of a root left, that root will usually sprout. Remember, there's not much water needed in a tiny little 2-leaf plant. So that seems to be not an issue. So don't be upset if you see lots of tiny little nothings.
Yeah, and if you pull one out, or if you're transplanting and there's like perlite stuck on the little baby roots, don't try to pull that perlite off.
Just leave it.
Yeah, just leave that there. Now, I do want to mention that certain seeds are notorious. You were talking about fungus. Now the Lysianthus I got today, it comes in little vials. The seeds are tiny, and the seeds are coated, I believe, in a fungicide. And some tomatoes they would come pink.
Yes, I remember.
Yes, and I believe that was a fungicide. I don't think they do that anymore. And I'm pretty sure that I have to look up, but I'm pretty sure, I don't know what the coating this Lysianthus has. Probably I'm not super familiar with growing Lysianthus from seed, but it was coated with something. So a lot of times things will be coated with fungicide is a big one.
Right. And especially, and sometimes you get beans, and that'll have it also, because you're going to direct sow those.
Yeah, and some of the seeds we do at work, we will spray as soon as we sow them. We will spray a fungicide because some of these plants are really sensitive to fungus. So we'll spray fungicides that generally aren't available to the homeowner. But
which is, the bleach, or some cases hydrogen peroxide, that acts as not an anti-fungicide, but it's
antimicrobial.
It's antimicrobial, basically.
Yeah.
One of the things we didn't mention is, even if you buy sterilized seed, if it's been stored for a while, it may very well have fungal spores in it. So I actually throw my little my little seed pots before I put the seed in into the microwave for about 30 seconds. It heats it to around 160. And I know you could leave it for a longer period at 160, but I don't. And I do believe that kills off a lot of the spores and potential insects' eggs that are in stored soil.
And seeds, the lifespan of seeds, it varies by plant. We're going through our seeds at work, and if it's something that's interesting, even if we've had the seed for 20 years, I'm like, let's pot it up and see. Our Welwitschia seeds that we have found, 20 years ago, they germinated. I was mentioning Cyphostemma seeds. They want to sit for years. But usually, like with tomatoes, as the years go by, you're probably going to get less and less, especially if moisture gets in there, which leads to the fungus. So you do want to store them in the cool, dry place, like I said, and not plastic. So.
An interesting fun fact. I believe that sometimes they find seeds in tombs that are,
Yes.
1,000 years old or
Yeah.
whatever, and they try to plant them,
Yeah.
and sometimes they
They
sprout.
sprout, which is crazy. I mean, it's all this. I mean, if you think about it, look at the giant sequoias sprouted from, a seed.
And it's a dust-like seed.
I know it's amazing. No matter what, I'm still amazed when the seeds germinate, whether it's a tomato or something else. It's still like, oh my gosh.
And here's a little fun, interesting thing. So, first of all, I was growing what they call Virea rhododendrons, which are tropicals.
Yeah.
I self-pollinated them, and the seed was dust.
Yeah.
They were about 8 months old, and they're maybe half an inch tall with 3 pairs of leaves. I'm not sure if that's the normal rate, but I think they're just slow. And then I've grown a lot of South African plants, which have to have that temperature differential from day to night. One batch from the same packet, one batch took 7 months, 6 months, one batch took 2 months. And there's another one that I planted in January, which I had my first seed sprouting. So
that's crazy.
I don't have an answer, but don't give up.
Don't give up. Don't give up ever. Just have empty pots for years with labels.
So, and then what I'll do is I'll say after a year, it's not sprouting, I'll dump it. And then I have these mystery seedlings, which I know are not grass and they're not marigolds coming up. And I say, well, just keep them.
Yeah. And keeping, good labels. Labels are, put the date, put, what makes great labels? Old mini blinds.
Wow, I never thought of that.
Yes, you could cut them. You cut them at a sharp angle and write it with pencil. It's the cheapest. Yeah, if you have old mini blinds, they make great plant labels. They look like plant labels.
Right.
Yeah.
And I will say that always don't just date when you plant them, when you sow the seeds. Date when you transplant them. Date when you make your second transplant. If you have a house plant and you're going to repot it, put a date on it. You say, maybe why should I bother? Because in a year or two, you might say, geez, I haven't repotted this plant in 2 years. Maybe I should just check the roots. It's really important to know when you do things.
Yeah. And I would definitely put more labels and things than not, because I'm always like, oh, these 6-packs are in a row. Well, if you move
I'll remember.
Then you move the 6-packs because you're like, that one's not fitting. This one died. I'm moving this. And then you're like, well, no clue what that is, especially with tomatoes. You're like, I have no idea what that is, or peppers. Nope.
I ordered some really fancy daffodil bulbs that, the $3 a bulb range, which is a lot of money for me. And I made a map of where I was going to put them, and I had everything labeled. And I took them out of the bags, put the bag down, and within 5 minutes, I mixed them up.
Yeah.
So it's really important to keep track of things.
This is why I don't work in a lab. Because the data would be just lost. They're like, what did you do with those? Well, it could be that vial or it could be that vial. That's
how Frankenstein got the abnormal brain.
There you go. I worked in his lab. The one bad thing would be, hot peppers. If you're like, you're like, well, I messed up the hot peppers, which, whatever. But,
who'll notice?
Yeah, whatever. Here, Joe, this one's labeled nothing, but it might be a sweet pepper. Yeah. But that is a big general overview of seed planting, because each plant has a different seed story and way of growing it. But for your run-of-the-mill vegetables, summer vegetables, and flowers, those are pretty much standard practice how I do it. And when to start, that depends on your zone, depends on your frost. The Sacramento Master Gardeners has an amazing guide that I go off of, and they will put on their guide whether you direct sow in the ground, start in a sheltered spot, they call it. And, you always want to count backwards. I think a lot of people probably start their seeds too soon. I mean, right now we're having a really nice week. But really you're not going to plant tomatoes until beginning of April, mid-April, and peppers even later than that. And you don't want these things getting so big and pot bound. So,
and you East Coast people who are now in the deep freeze, you don't want to start your tomatoes until probably at least early March, because my recollection is we plant them like early May is when you'll plant your tomatoes there. So, you have March and April for them to grow.
Which is still
plenty of
crazy
time.
because we're getting like 65 degrees, sunny and warm, and they're in a deep freeze. And really, there's only that much difference of timing to plant
Well,
once.
because in March, the temperatures increased dramatically. Right now,
Yeah.
they're at 5 degrees, which is super cold. But for the most part, by April, all your daffodils are blooming. By May, they're almost all done.
Yeah,
And
the temperatures.
Memorial Day is a big planting day, but I think
Okay.
these days you could probably plant tomatoes a little earlier.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, the planting time isn't that far. So the temperatures, I guess it's just those severe gradients that we don't have.
Well, yeah, you get the Arctic blast. You could
Mhm.
have. I'm looking at Casper, Wyoming, was 56 degrees.
Wow. Yeah.
And then they can be, negative 10. So you get, especially in
Yeah.
the East Coast, you get these big Arctic blasts, which
Mhm.
can really you get a warm period and you think, oh, we're done. And then you get an Arctic blast and
Well,
everything you've
that's here.
started
We
is.
think we're like, woo, this is, I'm actually, it might be temperatures are on the upswing. We probably will have a little bit of a drop. We're going to get more rain next week. Thank goodness.
Right. And
Um,
unlike the East Coast, when we get rain, it gets cold when it rains here versus there, the rain comes in warm and cold temperatures. So for us, if it's the good news is we're getting rain. The bad news is it's going to be a lot colder
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And the bad news is if we get heavy rains, because the almonds are starting to bloom. And you never want heavy rains when the almonds are in bloom. But
Because it really makes sense to grow almonds in a semi-arid desert.
only 1 gallon per almond. Okay, that's it.
Yeah,
And that's
what's
actually
1
true.
gallon per almond?
What's 1 gallon? Just really enjoy that almond when you
So
eat
instead of converting to
it.
1.2 gallons per flush toilets, eat 100 fewer
Yeah.
almonds, and that'll be a
Hey,
good
we're doing
flush.
our part so we could have almonds. Okay. Yeah. All right. If you like this podcast, you like this episode, please rate and review on Spotify and Apple podcasts. You could leave a review. If you do leave a nice review, it just helps us move up in the charts for people to see us. And if you have a question or a statement, you could email me at marlenetheplantlady@gmail.com. You can follow me on my Instagram and Facebook, which is Marlene the Plant Lady, and ask questions there. Bruce, are you on your social yet? Or are you just like
I'm
running?
a lazy bum.
No, you're retired and you have so much free time to do all these fun things.
Well, I'm also the email person for the Sacramento Botanical Gardens, which is our attempt at bringing a botanical garden to Sacramento, the capital of the 4th largest economy in the world, which doesn't have a botanical garden. So I do their email. So that's my
That's
social
enough.
thing.
Yes. So, and what's their website? That's sacbo. What is it?
Sacbo.org, SACBO.org.
Yeah.
And it has been updated with the new board members. And
Okay.
if you go to sacbo.org, you'll see we have some pretty prominent people now running the board. I've spoken with the president recently. They're very hopeful that this might be the year we finally, after 7 years, get a site.
That would be amazing.
Yeah,
Let's get our
we need
backs in shape so we could go work there as horticulturalists, Bruce.
Right. So I can go from retired to running the plant store, and they'll say, "What do I get for $5?" And I'll say, "You get out of here."
Yeah. And with that, happy gardening.
And we'll see you next time.